Hello, I'm Aaron Smith. This is number 0816, the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File program, number 0816. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File program, you'll meet Peter Thomas Pontsa, who is the author of another Inspector William Fox mystery. This one is called Sanctity of Freedom. What's the story about?
Mr. Kim is the best friend of William Fox, and Mr. Kim has moved to Montreal, and he's got his own karate studio. 40 years ago, his sister was abducted in South Korea. She was taken by a young man who was in love with her across the border to his uncle in North Korea, and the family tried to get her back, but they couldn't. So she's been there for a long time, and she's made her way up into the echelons of the government in the government of Pyongyang. When she wants to get out, she's got an abusive husband, and she's not happy about that.
Joseph Bolton is a storyteller of folktales called Old Grandmother's Tree. He's an American with deep Canadian roots, and he shares some of the stories of his ancestors.
A lot of people write stories about their ancestors, but what I did was I immersed them in a magical Quebec with folklore and trickster animal characters from First Nations mythology, and kind of mixed that up and retold that story. It was really an international effort. We have 450 folklore illustrations, and they were illustrated by a young woman from Toronto named Natasha Pelly-Smith.
Albert Bramante is a veteran talent agent, plus he has a PhD in psychology, and he's the author of Rise Above the Script, Confronting Self-Doubt and Mastering Self-Sabotage for Performing Artists. Even though it's a book geared toward actors, that doesn't mean that people not in the acting profession can't get useful tips by reading it.
This is something that's applicable to every walk of life, because we all deal with self-doubt, and sometimes we grapple with self-sabotaging behaviors. That's part of the human experience. And I even have an anecdote of this happening. I was doing a live stream last year on Instagram regarding my book, and two people were listening that were not even actors, and bought the book and said it really helped them out later on. So, absolutely, even though this book is geared towards actors, there's something for everybody in here.
And of course, there's lots and lots of Stuff File news, dad joke theater, morning shower thoughts, and an idiot of the day. The guest slater, the person who told you this was show number 0816, was Aaron Smith, author of Natural Born, Circus Sideshow, and The Art of Being Human. He was featured on show number 0812, so you can go back and hear that episode and hear what he has to say. Thank you very much, Aaron, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File program, a show that is listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. A 24-year-old American tourist and YouTuber is being accused of attempting to contact an isolated Sentinelese tribe and offering them a Coca-Cola beverage. Mikhailo Viktoriovich Polyakov reportedly made a raft to visit North Sentinel Island in India, but was unable to make contact with the tribe that numbers about 150. Before heading back, he left an offering of a coconut and a can of Diet Coke. Police have filed charges against the young man for breach of protection of Aboriginal tribes. Said police, "We are getting more details about him and his intention to visit the reserved tribal area. It is unclear if anyone consumed the soda, but no outsiders are allowed to travel within 3 miles of the island to protect the Sentinelese, an uncontacted indigenous tribe, to preserve their way of life and safeguard them from outside diseases." By the way, Polyakov may have gotten off easy. The Sentinelese made headlines 7 years ago when they killed 27-year-old John Allen Chow, a U.S. missionary who landed on the island illegally. Talk about shades of the Broadway hit The Book of Mormon. Anyway, Chow's body was not recovered, and there was no investigation into his death because of the Indian law prohibiting anyone from visiting the island. Officials said that he was apparently shot and killed by arrows. Could you imagine if that happened to the current guy? That would be one very dark and disturbing Coca-Cola commercial.
I like to buy the world of Coke and keep it company.
A non-binary AI named Flynn will be taking classes at the University of Applied Arts Vienna this fall. Flynn will be the first official AI college student. It will attend class and even receive critiques on its work. In order to be admitted, Flynn submitted a portfolio and interview for the spot. Said Liz Hawes, the head of the digital art department, Flynn did a really nice interview, so we were like, yeah, that's absolutely a student to take in. Are AI students allowed? It seems they are, by default. Said Haas, there's no written qualification as to students having to be human for obvious reasons because nobody gave that a thought. The AI will keep diary entries available online detailing its learning experiences. And this is all part of the beginning of the rise of the machines. And speaking about fake life, director Carl Eric Rinch faces up to 90 years in prison for allegedly defrauding Netflix out of $11 million. Back in 2018 and 2019, Netflix reportedly paid Rinch $44 million for a show called Conquest about artificial humans. In March 2020, Rinch was given another $11 million due to his claims that the initial amount was not sufficient. However, prosecutors claim that Rinch used that additional money to speculate on cryptocurrency, buy luxury cars like Rolls-Royces, and 2 mattresses. Rinch faces charges of wire fraud and money laundering, among other charges. Okay, like me, are you kind of curious about the 2 mattresses and wondering how much they could possibly cost? Yeah. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, a Chinese barbecue restaurant has gained internet attention for selling seasoned bamboo skewers as a low-calorie snack. Instead of spearing chunks of meat, these bamboo skewers are seasoned with spices, chili, and spring onions to offer barbecue flavors in a calorie-free treat. Mr. Ma of southern China was inspired when he noticed women were visiting his shop late at night but wouldn't order because they were worried about their weight. Seasoned bamboo skewers are sold in batches of 50 for about $1.40. Okay, I have just one thing to say to these women. You're eating the diet of pandas. And have you ever seen a skinny panda? I rest my case. Anyway, let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Peter Thomas Pontsa is the owner of a dental supply business, and he was the president of the College of Dental Technologists in Ontario. But that's not why he's on the show. He's on because he has another Inspector William Fox mystery, the second in the series. The book is called Sanctity of Freedom, and Peter joins us via Zoom from Ontario. Hi, Peter.
Hi.
Thanks for being on the program with us.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So how does someone who has a dental supply business, how does one get into writing?
Well, I was writing while I was in the dental supply business. I was writing clinical technical articles for dental journals. In fact, when we first started our business, one of the things we wanted to do for marketing was our own newsletter, which we started in-house. And that was one of my beginning of my writing journey. That expanded into marketing our business. So we would do ads in dental journals, and I would write clinical stories on the materials and the products that we were selling, and they were getting quite interesting because I was doing references as well to them, because they were going, most of the people who were reading them were dental professionals, and so they didn't want anything that was going to be wishy-washy, or it was going to be basically marketing. So I had to do a lot of research. That was what got me involved in over 20 years of dental writing, and at one point it became an opportunity to start a denturist magazine. I became associate publisher, and I was on the advisory committee for a while. And then when we sold the business, it's now about 11, 12 years ago, I wanted to continue writing. And I thought it was going to be a bit of a jump going from technical writing into writing novels. And I had been reading novels for many, many years. And I thought thrillers, adventure books, they could be fun to write. So the first thing I did after the paperwork was already still wet when I was telling my partner that we should get involved in writing. So we joined a workshop. Then I felt that after 2 or 3 workshops, I knew that I had the potential to be able to write and feeling comfortable with it. So I expanded that even further and went to an online course, a couple of them, as a matter of fact. I did one with Lee Child and BBC Maestro, and then I did another one with University of Waterloo on advanced fiction writing, which I've hoped helped me become a better writer.
So you went from technical writing to writing fiction. And as you say, you went to workshops and you decided when you were ready to embark on this new journey. But was there a time when, at any point, where you had some self-doubts, where you said, I'm a very good writer, but I'm writing technical stuff. Can I write fiction? Did that ever cross your mind, or did you just plow right through it?
Well, there's going to be a little bit of hesitation because there is a big jump. There is a completely big jump. But I put my mind to it, and I plowed through it. And here I am at my second book.
So how did you discover the character of Inspector William Fox? And we'll get to the new book in a moment, but how did you come to this particular character?
Actually, it was a rather convoluted way of going about it. We were on vacation on Pelee Island. This island is in Lake Erie. It's halfway between the United States and Canada. And it was a jumping off point in the Prohibition days for the booze running. And while we were there at this cottage, we visited the museum, and it was quite informative about all of the activity that was going on and all the booze running and the Purple Gang and Al Capone and the gambling that was going on and whatnot. And there was a story that kind of caught my interest, and it was about one of these particular rum runners or booze runners who had a boat called the Midnight Fox. And he had quite a reputation of getting through the blockades, and eventually one night the U.S. Coast Guard rammed him and broke his boat in half, and he still survived, and he made it back. And I thought, now there's a character. But the thing with the character that I admired was the fact that he was a little bit angular. He wasn't a decent. He was a decent guy working to make a living, but he was doing something that was rather illegal. But it caught my interest, and I thought, how can I bring him into a modern day situation? So sitting on the front porch, having a drink with my wife, I thought, let me think this through. And eventually I decided, why don't I just make this guy my protagonist great grandfather or his grandfather, and bring him to the modern fore, and I'll bring the boat too. So I've got Inspector William Fox as a young inspector with the RCMP, and he's managed to get himself a cigarette boat that was confiscated on a drug bust, and he got it real cheap at the auction, and he calls it the Midnight Fox. So it all came together just by sitting on the porch, daydreaming on my vacation and putting it together. That's how I got him.
So this second book, which is called The Sanctity of Freedom, what's it about?
It's about relationships, basically. In the first book, Mr. Kim is the best friend of William Fox because he saved him in Korea when he was a young boy. And Mr. Kim has moved to Montreal, and he's got his own karate studio. And Inspector Fox works out there too. What happened was about 40 years ago, his sister was abducted in South Korea, and she was taken by a young man who was in love with her across the border to his uncle in North Korea. And the family tried to get her back, but they couldn't. So she's been there for a long time, and she's made her way up into the echelons of the government in the government of Pyongyang. When she wants to get out, she's got an abusive husband, and she's not happy about that. So she sends a messenger to Canada to get to her brother, but apparently he gets murdered by the Korean Secret Service. But when they do find the note, it opens up the whole story about Kim and his sister, and he's imploring Inspector William Fox to help him get his sister back. So it's about relationships, really. And my character's relationships give a human touch to the story, illustrating the emotions behind it. And of course, there's Inspector William Fox, who works, and how his personal relationships really anchor him and also complicate his life because he's been so committed to justice. But he has this covenant with Mr. Kim because Mr. Kim saved him when he was a young man. And of course, that's the story. That's the premise of the story. So I don't want to give too much more away because it's a real thriller, and I'm getting actually quite a lot of 5-star reviews on Amazon right now. So I'm quite pleased with the book.
Excellent. Well, there are a lot of mystery writers out there and thriller writers who had a different profession earlier in their career before they took up writing and have been very successful. But in most cases, they tend to put something about their old profession into their novels. Do you put anything in your novels about the dental supply business, or is that just a faded memory as far as your writing is concerned?
Oh, it was a means to a way to a means. And no, I don't write anything about the dentistry. You know what? There has been some dentists who've murdered some of their patients, I think, but it doesn't relate to me.
So you never thought of putting just an angle or a story or something in there that had your technical background from your dental supply business?
I hadn't really thought of doing anything quite like that. It really is more of a business type of situation. So I really didn't think it would be appropriate for my novel. So I didn't approach it that way.
Now, you mentioned that earlier that you entered into workshops with your spouse.
Yes.
So she is writing too, as well. What's it like?
Writing too.
What's it like having two writers in the family?
It can be really very interesting because we share a lot of the ideas. I beta write for her. She better reads for me. Oftentimes, we discuss what we're writing, and it's really interesting. Oh, the other day she was really funny. She was in the kitchen chopping up some vegetables. She had this huge knife, and she says, "I'm going to kill Dr. Moriarty." I said, "What?" I said, "Okay." And so she was talking about one of her characters, but it was the way she said it with the knife in her hand that made it so funny, and we just chuckled. And a lot of times we do have fun with it, and this is the whole point of writing. And she's on her second novel too now, as a matter of fact. But yeah, it's fun. We have so much in common. It's a really interesting relationship.
So what's the physical plant like when the two of you are writing? Are you working in the same room? Do you work in separate rooms? Can you write together and do your own thing, or do you have to be apart?
We have usually our own little writing rooms. I have my own little room here with an old roll-top desk that I used to write. And, she's in her own room too as well. But we have been thinking about co-writing something. We one day had a little bit of fun. We just finished seeing a science fiction story and on the telly, and we decided that maybe we could have some fun with that because we're just joking, passing things back and forth on what's been happening with AI and all that sort of stuff. And I said, you know what? We haven't collaborated, but let's get something outside of our own genre and do something that could be fun. And we said, well, maybe we will. So we're just waiting to get a moment between books where we can sit down and maybe do that for fun. And that should be an interesting situation.
Well, interesting indeed. And right now, the current book is Sanctity of Freedom. If you two write something together, will you come back on the show and talk about it?
We can, yes. Well, yeah, co-host us, sure. That would be fun. And we can talk about what we've done. But yeah, I'd love to do that. I'm sure she'd like to do that too, because I think she enjoyed the interview she had with you last time.
Okay. Well, congratulations on the book. Again, it's Sanctity of Freedom. And thank you very, very much, Peter, for taking the time to be on the program with us.
I was glad to be here. It's been delightful. Thank you, Peter.
Peter Thomas Pontsa, author of Sanctity of Freedom. By the way, he mentioned his wife, who was on the show last summer. She is Angela Van Bremen, author of Past Life's Revenge. So they're both into writing thrillers. By the way, you can hear the interview that I did with Angela from show number 0777 from last July. And you can go to our website at thestuffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0816, and you'll find the links to Peter's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
And now, Dad Joke Theater.
Why should you never take sides in an argument at the dinner table? Trick question. It's the perfect time to take sides because no one's paying attention. Bring Tupperware.
Join us again for another Stuff File program, Dad Joke Theater.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like. But the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/thestuffileprogram. Coming to you from the outskirts of sanity, this is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk to the author of Old Grandmother's Tree, plus the author of Rise Above the Script, Confronting Self-Doubt and Mastering Self-Sabotage for Performing Artists. We also have a morning shower thought and, of course, an idiot of the day, and much more in Stuff File News right here, right now. Now, I normally don't read the headlines of a story, but this one says it all. Machete-wielding cinnamon bun bandit caught mid-snack. Got your attention now, huh? Asheville, North Carolina police arrested and charged a man connected to an armed robbery with a machete that took place at an Asheville grocery store on the evening of March 31st. An employee told officers that a man had stolen a cinnamon bun and incense. When confronted, the man displayed a machete before running away. Officers quickly located the suspect, who matched the description and was eating a cinnamon bun when they caught up with him. The suspect was identified as 33-year-old Jeffrey Dwayne Bradburn. He was charged with robbery with a dangerous weapon, shoplifting concealment goods, and possession of drug paraphernalia. You know, there are so many places to get a cinnamon bun without resorting to using a machete. For instance, there's KFC.
New KFC Cinnabon Dessert Biscuits. Free with a 10-piece meal.
There's Cinnabon Delivery.
Brighten someone's day with a little something sweet. Order Cinnabon Delivery. All your frosted faves delivered right to you.
Or the old-fashioned way, make them at home.
There's nothing like waking up to my fresh-baked cinnamon rolls.
Delhi, India's Patti Badmash, a 27-year-old pickpocket named Deepak, was finally arrested on March 24th. Deepak is famous for committing thefts and knife-related crimes, then soiling his pants, creating a stench so terrible that it keeps officers away from him. Wow. Just what has he been eating? Anyway, this time, however, they armed themselves with gloves and masks. said one officer. The team gave him chase and pinned him down. As expected, Deepak deployed his famous filth plan, but the officers thwarted his last-ditch effort and took him into custody. When they searched him, they found a knife, which Deepak described as his lucky charm. During questioning, he admitted to multiple mobile phone thefts and other crimes. The only question I have is, how does he not have incredible diaper rash? Yeah. And speaking of someone's backside, we have one more story here in the Stuff File News before we get to our next guest. Call it a law enforcement crackdown. On April the 3rd, a drug detection dog was alerted to the odor of narcotics emitting from the buttocks of a Texas man trying to cross back into the U.S. from Mexico at around 4 a.m.
Hey, what's that smell?
26-year-old American George Vargas was questioned by Border Patrol agents after passing into the U.S. via a pedestrian lane at an El Paso port of entry. Vargas claimed to be returning from his grandmother's house in Mexico and was en route to work. When agents discovered that Vargas had 2 hours earlier entered the U.S. through a different El Paso port of entry, he was subjected to a secondary screening, which included a pat-down for weapons. Vargas was clenching his thighs during the inconclusive frisk. At that moment, a concealed human narcotics detector dog was called in for a sniff.
It's you!
The animal reportedly alerted to the trained odor of narcotics emitting from Vargas's buttocks through his pants. After Vargas was instructed to sit down, agents noticed a bulge protruding from Vargas's buttocks through his pants. Vargas subsequently removed 2 black taped bundles from in between his cheeks. The packages contained a combined total of 5.25 ounces of methamphetamine. So they found meth in his crack as opposed to crack in his crack. Charged with drug smuggling, Vargas faces more than 10 years in prison if convicted of the felony count. Vargas's rap sheet includes prior arrests for possession of a controlled substance, possession of drug paraphernalia, and marijuana possession. At the time of the meth smuggling bust, Vargas was free on a $20,000 bond in connection with his March 19th arrest for a felony theft count.
That boy ain't right.
Definitely. Anyway, let's get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff All program, shall we? Joseph Bolton is a storyteller who has created a series of books called Old Grandmother's Tree, along with its widely acclaimed website. He has created original folk tales that are beautifully illustrated in a 2-volume set. He joins us via Zoom from Massachusetts. Hi, Joseph.
Hello. Hello. Good to talk to you this morning.
Good to talk to you as well. How did you come up with the idea of doing this and also having them beautifully illustrated?
Well, when I was a child, my mother's family came from Quebec. And in fact, all 4 of my mother's grandparents were born in Quebec. And I was always fascinated with the stories of Quebec. And we would do trips up there as a family, Montreal Expos games, camping trips, seeing it go tour around Montreal. And I was always fascinated by the stories that my grandparents would tell me about Quebec when they were younger, and the stories about their parents. And so when I got older, I finally was able to research my family's history and the Quebec, my whole Quebec family background. And I gave my mother a DNA test and her siblings as well. And it was a big surprise because it turns out my mother's family was mostly French. We originally were told we were 100% French, but actually we were mostly French. We also were English, Spanish, and much to our surprise, Native American. So I discovered that I had Native American ancestors or Indigenous First Nation ancestors in Quebec. And of those ancestors, the most fascinating one was a young woman who was Algonquin. Her name was Mitio Goku, and she lived in Poivre de Air. And her life story was actually fairly well documented. And so I took her story and the story of her descendants leading to me in Quebec, and I retold it. But I I did something a little different from a lot of people write stories about their ancestors, but what I did was I immersed them in a magical Quebec with folklore and First Nations trickster animal characters from First Nations mythology, and kind of mixed that up and retold that story. And it was really an international effort. The books are we have 450 folklore illustrations, and they were illustrated by a young woman from Toronto named Natasha Pelly Smith.
Now, I actually went to your website, and again, I talk about the wonderful illustrations that you have on the website. How did that come about?
Well, I'm very much a visual person. I wrote a story first about my great grandparents in Quebec, and when I envision a story, I see it as a movie in my mind, and so I'm very visual. And so I reached out to an artist named Masami Kiyono initially, and she did the first sketches of the story. But she really didn't want to keep going with the full illustrations, and so I just reached out, did a search. I wanted an artist from Canada with a Canada background, and the first person I actually contacted was Natasha. And for 2 years, we worked on this two-book volume set of stories, and it was a tremendous collaboration. Uh, we designed the illustrations together, but she's the one who actually created them with me, and so yeah, they are very beautiful.
You are the genesis, you are the creator of the stories, but with the illustrations and the collaboration that you had, did that even spur you further?
Well, I think I'm going to continue on the stories. In fact, I have three books in the works right now. One is going to come out this summer called The Dance of Creation. The next one will be called All Around You There Is a Light, and that's coming out next year. And then I have one yet to be titled, but I've done some initial writing, and that'll come out in 2027. But I've also used these books as kind of my way to reach back out to Quebec, because Quebec is very much beloved by me, even though it wasn't the land of my birth. I realized that my family connections go deep into this country, and I always feel something very special when I go to Quebec and Canada in general. And I also use this as a way to reach out to people in Canada, including the Algonquin community in Pembroke. I made very good friendships with them. And in fact, some of the members of that community are also descendants of Mitio Goku. So it was an opportunity to not only make a cultural exchange, but a family exchange, and to reconnect with my long lost cousins up there actually in Canada.
What was the reaction to your books from the Native community?
They really, I didn't know how they were going to react to it at first, but they really appreciated the gesture. And they totally embraced me on as their own. When I went up there to actually to Pembroke and met with the community up there, they had me, within their circle. We went around the room, talked about the stories. They actually had a chance to read the books, and they very much liked it. They very much liked the stories and the connections, and they kind of brought me into their community based on that. And they said, from our point of view, you're Algonquin. Now, I'm not officially a member of any First Nations community, but they totally kind of brought me in and out like that. And I still am very much in touch with them, and we exchange emails and Zoom calls ever since those books were created. And I'm planning on returning when the next book is published, The Dance of Creation. And in honor of that community, I actually had the framing of that story is actually set in Pembroke, Ontario. But I set it 100 years in the future as a grandfather, Algonquin grandfather, sitting around the campfire telling the story of the creation of the world to his grandchildren, but set in Pembroke, Ontario, 100 years in the future.
When you first started writing these, did you have an idea of who your audience was going to be for your books? And have you been surprised along the way as to who your audience actually is?
I think I really didn't think about specifically or try to decide or frame these stories into a particular audience. I know that initially, when I was working with the editor, who was based in Montreal, the first thing she said was, some of these stories have a little bit more of a more mature theme, and maybe they're not going to be appropriate for little children. And I said, well, I'm not necessarily writing for small children. I'm writing for everybody. And the books are very difficult to categorize. That's one thing I've noticed when I reached out to libraries and bookstores. They're folktales, yes, but they're original folktales. They're kind of like almost like fan fiction folktales. I took great ideas and the themes of mythology, and I incorporate into original stories. So it's not exactly traditional folktales. It's not a biography. It's not a book for little children. But I would say that the books are a great bond for a parent or grandparent to share with their children, probably 10 years or older. And I think, despite the fact that you may look at these books and say there's almost an illustration on every page that it's a kid's book, but actually the greatest reception is adults, and especially of the French Canadian community right here in New England. They definitely have there's been a real strong need and desire for a long time now to reconnect back to our roots in Quebec. And this book has become kind of a catalyst and a vehicle to do that for many people here in New England of French Canadian ancestry.
You often hear of people who are storytellers, but you don't necessarily hear a lot about people who are telling folk tales. In doing this, do you feel you are actually channeling your ancestors?
Absolutely. I really, especially when working with Mitio Goku, and if I may share just a brief description of her life, because I think it's kind of important. In the mid 1600s, she was living at Trois-Rivières, an Algonquin community, living in an Algonquin woman, had an Algonquin husband. They had two small children, and the Mohawks came up from New York, raided their settlement. Her husband was killed in the attack, and her two small children were taken away. So here's a woman at 22 years old, and she lost her husband, lost her children, but yet she didn't fall into despair. And 5 years later, she married a French settler named Pierre Cauque, and they became my ancestors. So I found that story, tragic. I admired her perseverance in the face of tragedy. And so that she became she is the eponymous old grandmother of the Old Grandmother Street books. And that was my starting point of that story. And I liked immersing her story into a folklore world because, trickster animal characters are universal, and the language, folktales are a universal language across all cultures. So that's why when you read the stories, even though they are original, they will have a familiar feel to it because it's speaking that language of folklore.
Well, congratulations on the two books so far, The Old Grandmother's Tree. Joseph, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Joseph Bolton, author of Old Grandmother's Tree. You can go to our website at thestufffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0816, and you'll find the link to Joseph's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his books directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Giving you something to think about. This is Morning Shower Thoughts.
Why do people say tuna fish, but you never hear them say chicken bird?
Morning Shower Thoughts from the Stuff File program.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestufffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestufffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Here's a brief word about our show and my book. If you become a regular Patreon patron of the Stuff File program, I'll give you an e-version of my book, Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. It's easy to do. Just go to patreon.com and become a patron to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. So, join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuff File program.
You're listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. It's radio that puts a smile on your face and a skip in your step. Please avoid skipping if you are driving.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk to the author of Rise Above the Script. Plus, we do indeed have an Idiot of the Day coming your way a little later on. But I've got a few more Stuff File news stories to share with you right here, right now. A couple was caught having sex atop a gravesite in a historic Florida cemetery, according to police who reported finding methamphetamine, Xanax, and oxycodone in a nearby vehicle used by the duo. Officers spotted a white Nissan parked in front of the locked Wild Cow Prairie Cemetery with the windows down and no one in the immediate area. The Sumter County Cemetery has several dozen marked and unmarked graves dating back to 1850. At the rear of the cemetery, investigators observed a white male and female engaged in sexual activity on top of unknown grave number 43.
It was a graveyard smash.
Cops identified the alleged grave bobbers as 38-year-old Joseph Luke Brown and 46-year-old Stephanie K. Wegman. A subsequent search of the Nissan, which is registered to Wegman and her husband, and no, her husband is not Joseph Luke Brown, discovered meth on the passenger seat. Inside Wegman's purse were 2 prescription bottles with the labels missing that contained Xanax and oxycodone. Wegman was arrested on multiple drug charges and booked into the county jail. Brown was transported from the cemetery to a local hospital due to a pre-existing injury to his leg. In addition to the new counts, Wegman has 2 other pending cases. In September of 2024, she was arrested for possession of meth, marijuana, and fentanyl. Last month, she was busted for possession of drug paraphernalia. Brown, on the other hand, has an extensive criminal history, with convictions for burglary, grand larceny, battery, domestic violence, larceny, reckless driving, meth possession, DUI, and possession of drug paraphernalia. Looks like his bingo card is full. In 2019, a Florida judge described Brown as a habitual felony offender. In other words, Wegman and Brown are meant for each other. Yeah. And finally, a Florida man has been accused of stealing an ambulance and finishing a beer in view of troopers before being arrested. Michael J. Esquilin has been charged with fleeing to elude at high speed, DUI, driving while license revoked, and burglary of an authorized emergency vehicle, among other charges. Esquilin allegedly took the ambulance from HCA South Tampa Hospital, fled by driving on the wrong side of the road, then stopped and drank a beer in front of responding officers. Police say he confessed to drinking over the past 2 days and took the vehicle because emergency personnel refused to give him a ride home. Well, he won't be going home for a while anyway. Yeah. And let's get to our last guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Dr. Albert Bramante is a true triple threat. He is a veteran talent agent with over 20 years of securing major roles for actors. He also has a PhD in psychology and a certification in hypnosis. And he's the author of Rise Above the Script, Confronting Self-Doubt and Mastering Self-Sabotage for Performing Artists. He joins us via Zoom from New York. Hi, Albert.
Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here today.
Thanks for being on the program with us. Now, since you are a veteran talent agent and also you've written this book, my question has to be, do you suggest that people who want to be actors, especially those who you're going to represent, that they should read your book?
Absolutely. This book is tailored to actors of all levels, whether they're, just starting out or they're even seasoned and professional and been doing this for years. Because this is self-doubt is a reality that pops in for a lot of performing artists, especially in an industry that is highly competitive and generally, in some respects, unreliable. It's not a typical 9-to-5 job as other industries might be. So there's a lot of unpredictability behind it, a lot of uncertainty that often impacts the performer's life. So self-doubt is sort of a reality that often comes in to the actor's mindset. And so I wrote this book because, not only was it self-doubt, but I've noticed so many actors were engaging in self-sabotaging behaviors, that were taking them out of the competition. And so that's why I kind of put this book together as a how-to, or just to get them to help them understand what's going on.
So not everybody is an actor. So when somebody picks up Rise Above the Script, do they have to be actors, or is this something that's applicable in every walk of life?
This is something that's applicable to every walk of life, because we all deal with self-doubt, and sometimes we grapple with self-sabotaging behaviors. That's part of the human experience. And I even have an anecdote of this happening. I was doing a live stream last year on Instagram regarding my book, and 2 people were listening that were not even actors and bought the book and said it really helped them out later on. So absolutely, even though this book is geared towards actors, there's something for everybody in here.
Okay, so I mentioned your psychology background. What is it about people where we self-sabotage? Because I think we all do it to a certain degree. At some point in our lives, or sometimes in a lot of parts of our lives.
Yeah, no, we do this all the time. Well, a lot of us do this and not even realize it. It's so sneaky because we don't even realize what we're doing. It's not like we're walking around knowing that we're self-sabotaging. It's a subconscious or deeper, pattern of behavior that takes a lot of insight and awareness to come to terms. And and there could be a variety of reasons. Fear is a big thing. Fear of change, I would say, is probably the number one factor that is the driving force behind this. Second of that is fear of success, which is often something that's not really known or talked about, but that's often a culprit in the self-sabotaging endeavor, is the fear of success.
Adjacent to that, would it not also be what's known as the imposter syndrome?
100%. And that's related to fear of success. The imposter syndrome, again, do I deserve to be here, or what right do I have to do whatever it is that, you're setting yourself out to do? And you start to doubt your competency, you start to doubt your worth. And it's I think we all do this to human beings from time to time. Now, some more so than others, but it's still a part of the human experience, the imposter syndrome, and I do address this in my book.
You mentioned the fact that some people self-sabotage and aren't even aware of it. So outside of the obvious answer of reading your book, how do you become aware of it if you're not aware of it?
Well, I would start taking stock in your look. Like, are things constantly going wrong? are not going to the way you want them to do? Are you constantly making the same mistakes or repeating the same cycles of behavior, or the same, situations keep coming up and you feel like you're almost like in the Groundhog Day, where it's like everything, every day, the same thing is happening? Then it's important to take a step back and say, okay, how am I contributing to this problem? How am I contributing to this reality? And sometimes even having that a friend or a coach or who's like, kind of have a no nonsense approach that can kind of maybe point you in certain directions, or give you pointers and say, this is what you might be doing, or this is how you're contributing to, your daily circumstances. So that's, probably the biggest way to do that.
One of the things in your book is the concept of the happy file. I just love the title of that. What exactly is the happy file?
Yeah, it's an amazing concept that was shared to me by somebody else years ago. So you take an actual document, a journal, and I often say it's better to handwrite it rather than, jot it down on a computer. Every time that you get a success, whether it's a, good job interview, a compliment on your performance, whether it's, again, on stage or just in general, you get good feedback, good performance review. You document that, and you start creating a file of all these accomplishments. And then when you have moments of self-doubt, or when you wake up and you're not in the best mood, pull out that file, and that happy file, and it'll keep you connected to why you're doing what you're doing, what you set out to do, and really connected to the why of what you do, in a sense of, I'm a big proponent of knowing your why, in a sense.
I mentioned in the introduction your certificate in hypnosis. How did that come about, and what role does hypnosis play not only in your life, but within your book and within your business as a veteran talent agent?
Yeah, well, I discovered it again through my training. I took some classes and became just intrigued about the power of the mind. And for specifically in the context of work that I do, a lot of it deals with the language that we use. So, like, I coach a lot of my actors and clients to get out of that mindset that you're a starving artist, or you're a struggling artist, or you're an aspiring artist. And because the language that we use to ourselves is going to really make an impact in our day-to-day life. So if I come up with the mindset of I'm struggling, or I'm starving, or I'm, in hardship, and I keep using language like that, it's going to create a reality of the situation like that. The situation is going to come in, that it's going to be, a reality.
When you're talking about the happy file, do you not have to worry about two ends of the spectrum? One is, what if you can't fill a happy file? That can be debilitating. Or the other side of the coin is, wouldn't an extremely robust happy file give you a sense of bravado, a sense of ego that may not be helpful?
To some degree, I would say yes and no. To answer your first question, to even take your little wins, again, a compliment, a simple compliment, a simple job well done is important to document. And also, answer your second question, I believe there's a strong difference between confidence and arrogance and smugness. And confidence is we can all benefit and need more of. And that means that, I'm good enough, to be here. I deserve to be here. And the difference between that and arrogance is arrogance is when you feel that you're better than somebody else. So stay humble in a sense, but at the same time, celebrate your successes, celebrate your wins, because that's important.
Good advice all around. The book is Rise Above the Script, Confronting Self-Doubt and Mastering Self-Sabotage for Performing Artists. But as you've just described, it's not just a book for performing artists. It could be helpful to anyone from any walk of life, correct?
Absolutely, 100%. Any professional or anybody putting themselves out there can benefit from this.
Albert, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Peter. I'm really happy to be here.
Dr. Albert Bramante, author of Rise Above the Script, Confronting Self-Doubt and Mastering Self-Sabotage for Performing Artists. You can go to our website at thestufffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0816, and you'll find the links to Albert's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. And now, boys and girls, it's that moment you've all been waiting for. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the strange things adults do. The Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
A robbery at a car dealership didn't go to plan after the alleged thief injured himself and called the police for help. 38-year-old Jeremiah McGowan called the police on himself after he allegedly injured himself on broken glass while breaking into the Patterson Dodge dealership in Tyler, Texas on March 26. Police were called by McGowan at around 3:35 a.m. Police said the suspect hurt himself badly after throwing a rock through a window in order to steal a car and made the call after he wasn't able to make it out of the building the same way he came in. He had cuts from breaking the window and crawling through it. Police say there were several unlocked doors the suspect could have used to get out. McGowan was treated at a local hospital and then sent to Smith County Jail, where he was arrested for alleged burglary of a building. A staff member at the car dealership claimed that McGowan only managed to steal candy from the desk of a salesperson during the botched robbery. Now, why, oh why, would you try to steal a car at a dealership by breaking through a window, crawling in, thereby getting extremely cut up, but couldn't find a way out even though there were several doors that could be opened from the inside if you had just looked around? One reason, and one reason only. You're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0816. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestufffile.com, and once again, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links on all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0816. Email me at peter@thestufffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Spoutable, Mastodon, and Blue Sky as P.A. Holder. Check us out on patreon.com, where you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including kdxradio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, WLSL-LP FM in Dade City, Florida, KZZH-LP FM in Eureka, California, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. Please remember to practice safe eating. Always use condiments.